Hi, I'm Andrew from Florida Tips for Brits. Thanks so much for clicking on this video. And in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the 10 most commonly asked questions that people have about visiting Orlando, Florida. Now, these are questions that people have asked me most frequently over the last 20, 30 years while I've been going to Orlando. So in this video, I'm going to be answering those questions hopefully for you, making your life a little bit easier. So with all that being said, let's get into it. All right, so the first question that I'm asked a lot is there a time difference, or more specifically, what is the time difference between the UK and Orlando? And the answer is, it's 5 hours. Orlando is going to be 5 hours behind the UK's time. So when you first get there, expect to be kind of tired and wanting to go to bed at 6 o'clock in the evening because, you know, your body still thinks it's 11 PM or whatever in the UK, and expect some really early starts in the morning because you're going to want to get up at your usual time, and that might be 3 o'clock in the morning in Orlando. Now, this does have its advantages, of course, especially if you're going to those theme parks, because it means it's super easy, at least at the start of the holiday, to get to the theme parks for what they call rope drop, which is basically the very beginning of the day, the opening, where they literally drop a rope and let people go into the various parts of the theme park. Just means you can potentially get some rides done and stuff like that. But yeah, generally speaking, it's going to be a 5 hour time difference. There is a short time during the year when it's only 4 hours because of daylight savings. America has their daylight savings at a slightly different time to the UK. So you do get that short period of I think it's about a week or 10 days, where for a short time the difference is only 4 hours, but generally speaking it's a 5 hour time difference. All right, number 2 on the list, and this is probably, if it's not the most asked question, it's very close to the top of the list, and that is, do I need 6 months remaining on my passport if I'm going to be going to Orlando? And the answer is no, you don't. Absolutely not. There's been an agreement in place between the United Kingdom and the United States for years at this point, which basically means that as long as your passport is valid at the time of your return from your travel, you're golden, you can go, you're fine. I've done it myself, actually. I've tested the theory out a few years back. I went and my passport was literally due to run out like a week or something after I came home off holiday. Absolutely fine, no problems whatsoever. So as long as your passport is valid for the whole time of your stay, and obviously including your return journey, you should be absolutely fine. So no, you don't need 6 months on your passport. You can put your mind at rest. So keeping along the same lines, and that is, what is an ESTA or an ESTA? You'll hear about this a lot if you've been looking into booking a holiday to Florida. People will be saying make sure you get your ESTAs done before you book any travel and things like that. Now, an ESTA stands for Electronic System for Travel Authorization, and basically it fits in place of, in lieu of like a visa, like a travel visa. So again, we have an agreement with the United States where people from the United Kingdom who are traveling on a British passport and etc., we can visit places like Orlando, and all we need is to do one of these ESTAs. So the way an ESTA works is you go online, you fill in a bunch of details about your personal circumstances, you have to put your passport number in and things like that. So this is very important. You have to have your passport in hand when you're doing your ESTA, and also if you do need to get a new passport, there's no point doing your ESTA if you're going to then send your passport off, because new passport means new ESTA, okay? Once you've actually completed that ESTA though, providing that you don't change your passport, it is going to be valid for 2 years, which makes some of the questions on there seem a little bit weird. Like one of the questions is, where are you going to be staying? And that kind of might only be valid for that one trip. It doesn't matter, okay? It doesn't matter. But yeah, you are going to need an ESTA if you haven't got a visa. Obviously, if you've got a visa to visit the United States, then you're not going to need an ESTA as well. This is for everybody who hasn't got a visa. So for example, I don't have a visa. I travel on an ESTA, and mine's run out. I need to renew mine, but currently mine's run out. But before I book my next travel, I will go online, I will get my ESTA authorised, and then I will book my travel, so that I know that gives me permission to travel to the United States. And it doesn't automatically grant you entry, by the way. I'm just throwing that out there. It's permission to travel, not necessarily permission to enter. So they can still refuse you at border protection, although Hopefully that should never happen, but it could happen. Just be aware of that. The other thing is they definitely don't need or have to provide you with an ESTA. You can apply for one and it can be refused. Now this can be for any reason whatsoever. It literally, maybe you've made a small error somewhere on the form, or perhaps your name is very similar or the same as somebody who America don't particularly want visiting their country. I've had this before. I've heard one friend of my parents, their daughter, who was very young at the time, had a name that was the same as somebody who'd been a very naughty girl and was wanted by the police, and so therefore the little girl got refused an ESTA. Doesn't matter that she's only a little girl, obviously a little girl, clearly a case of mistaken identity. They still had to go and visit the US Embassy in London and get a visa for that little girl. This can obviously take time, which is why I'm saying it's a really good idea to get your ESTAs sorted before you go ahead and book travel, because you definitely don't want something like this, causing problems for you visiting the States. Okay, this one gets asked a surprising amount, and that is that can you drink the water in Florida? Yeah, it's fine. You can drink the water. Does it taste very nice? No, it doesn't. It tastes chlorinated because that's kind of what they do to the water in Florida. So to my palate, the water, not very nice. I prefer to drink bottled water that you can get from like a supermarket or something like that. You can usually buy like huge like gallon jugs or 2-gallon jugs of water. Not very expensive. Keep it in the fridge, use that if I'm just having drinking water. Tap water is completely fine if you're using it in something like a coffee maker, however. You really can't taste it by the time it's boiled up. Or I've also found that if you let's say you're staying in an apartment or a villa or a hotel or something that's got like a filtration system on the water, that certainly seems to really help with the taste of the chlorine as well. But as for is it safe, in a pinch, yeah, you can drink it, it's fine. All right, so this is for everybody who's thinking about hiring a car when they're on their next holiday, and that is that do you need an international driver's permit to hire a car in Florida? The really short answer here is no, providing that you've got a British passport and your passport is in English. That's it. You basically need your British passport in English and your payment, and you should be good to go. There's absolutely no need for an international driver's permit. This isn't the same in every state, so if you're traveling to other states, check. But for Florida, as of the time of making this video, you don't need an international driver's permit if it's a UK license and it's in English. So being Brits, we like to take some home comforts with us, and a question that I get asked all of the time is, can I take food with me to Florida? The answer is yeah, kind of. You can't take meat, fruit, vegetables. You can't take any of that, okay? But you can take things like tea bags, for example. We're British, right? Everybody, a lot of people like a cup of tea, don't they? It's our national drink. You're fine to take tea bags because they are hellishly expensive in Orlando. So if you're the type of person like my mother and father-in-law who really has to have a cup of tea in the morning and he knows he's gonna have several cups of tea during the day, it might be an idea just to keep a little bit of space in your luggage and just pack 100 tea bags or whatever. But yeah, you're completely fine to take them. You can take a surprising amount of stuff. There is actually a website, the CBP, which is Customs and Border Patrol. They actually have a website which details everything that you can and can't take. So if you're super concerned about anything in particular, you can go on there and check out the full list of do's and don'ts. But as a rule, as long as it's not fruits, vegetables, or like meat, so you can't take a steak with you, you should be completely fine. But do check that website because things can and do change. But yeah, as a rule of thumb, you can take food with you. We used to take stuff for friends who had emigrated over there. We used to take bits and pieces with us, Cadbury's chocolate and stuff like that. It's fine, but do check the Border Patrol website just to make sure there haven't been any changes since I'm making this video right now. Okay, this next one is a little bit of a tricky pickle, and that is, what is the weather like at X time of year? So people will always say, what's the weather like in December or whatever, because, you know, maybe they want to go for Christmas. Or November, is it any good in November? Is it still hot? Do we need a jumper? Florida's weird. It's a bit like the UK in which, in the respect that the weather is extremely changeable. So kind of random sometimes. So over the years, I've been to Orlando in literally every single month of the year. January to December, been every month. And I've had different experiences almost every single time. The one thing you can say for certain is that generally from about middle of March-ish until about November-ish, it's pretty hot. That'd be the best. That'd just be about the best description I can give you. It's pretty hot, pretty hot. And then also between, like, I don't know, like June and end of September, it's also pretty wet. It can kind of rain a lot, but that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. Like I've been in summer before. I've spent several, like, entire summers in Orlando, literally 6-7 weeks at a time. My parents have a house there. It's, you know, it's a whole deal. We spend 6-7 weeks there over those kids' summer holidays. And, you know, that should be the hottest, wettest time of the year. And I have literally had years where it hasn't, or I personally, I haven't been rained on, or I've been rained on like literally one time. We went in, I think it was a few years ago now, it was like 2016 or something like that. And we went and it was a huge thunderstorm literally just after we landed. And then I didn't see rain again, so we were driving back to the airport. True story. I'm not saying it didn't rain in Florida in that whole 6 or 7 weeks we were there, but the part of Florida that I was in at any particular time, no rain. Didn't see it. It was stupid hot, mega humid, but no rain. I've been other times when it will, like clockwork, you will seem to get that thunderstorm every day at about 3 o'clock. Thunderstorm. Checks in, an hour later, everything's gone. It's dry, sun's back out, back to being crazy hot, the whole deal. So Florida's very much like that. Likewise, you kind of think, oh, winter time, is that going to be cold in Florida then? Not necessarily. I've been to Orlando at in December, when it has been literally, I've been sat out on the pool deck at my parents' house. It's been like 10:30 in the evening and it's been 80 degrees. It's dark out, you know, in December. That's wild, isn't it? But likewise, 2019 I was there in December and it was cold. Like, it was actually cold. We went to the Very Merry Christmas party and I could believe it was actually snowing on Main Street because it was literally, it was actually cold. I think that's maybe only the second time in Orlando when I thought I should have really brought a coat. I literally had a hoodie and that's like all I had. But I probably could have done with a heavier jacket on that occasion. But generally speaking, the weather tends to be fairly temperate. It doesn't tend to get particularly cold or anything like that. So I think the best advice I can give you here is to check things like AccuWeather on the old internet, because that does have historical data for what the weather's like, and that is going to be just about the best bet you've got for trying to make any predictions on what the weather's going to be like at all. Because in my experience, to quote Forrest Gump, you never know what you're going to get. Okay, so staying on the subject of weather now, and that is that when is hurricane season? Well, hurricane season starts June the 1st and runs all the way to November the 30th. And if you're interested, peak hurricane season day is September the 10th. Just a little bit of trivia for you there. So that doesn't mean you're definitely going to get a hurricane. In fact, hurricanes in central Florida, which is where all your theme parks are, so Walt Disney World, Universal Orlando, things like that, actually tends to get hit by hurricanes kind of rarely. It's much more likely that you'll be troubled by a hurricane if you're staying on the coast. That doesn't mean that it can't happen, however. It's happened quite recently. If you think back to Hurricane Irma, which was a few years ago now, 2017, was it 17, 2018? Can't remember. My parents were there for that one. So it was kind of a bit frightening. They had to put mattresses up against the windows in their house and things like that. And it was loud and scary, but fortunately they were completely fine. But hurricanes can and do happen, could happen to you. So it's a good idea to maybe, if you are traveling between that 1st of June and 30th of November, to maybe have a little bit of a plan or an idea about what you should do in the event of a hurricane. There are loads of really good guides online. As a rule of thumb, I'd recommend having some bottled water in and things like that, just as a bare minimum. A lot of villas, like my parents' villa, when they used to rent it out, they would have like wind-up torches and things like that in case the power goes out. But it can be a good idea to just be prepared if you go in that time of year. So just bear that in mind. I don't want to scare anybody because, like I say, I have been going since 1993, so it's like 30 years this year. And the only time I got close to being in two, we missed Hurricane Irma by a week. And then most recently, 2019, we literally got out the day before Hurricane Dorian was due to hit. It was literally the last flight out from Virgin Atlantic before they closed Orlando Airport. So that is the closest I've ever come to being in a hurricane. My mum and dad have been in 3 different ones now. They were fine. But it's just a case of just be aware that it can happen and have a plan just in case. It really is belt and braces. You're probably not going to need it, but I think for your own peace of mind and things like that, it can be a good idea to have some ideas. So there's plenty of guides that you can find online about what to do in a hurricane. If I can find a good one that I would recommend, I'll stick it in the description down below. All right, I get asked this one all the time, and that is, will I see alligators? You will see alligators, yeah. It's Florida and they're kind of basically everywhere. In fact, I think there's a famous statistic that says there are more alligators than people in Florida. I don't know if that's still true or if it was ever true, but I've certainly heard it a number of times, so I'm going to stick with it for this video because why not? But yeah, there's certainly plenty of alligators out there. We've seen them just walking down the street. Not a problem. You'll also likely see things like turtles. They're super common. You'll just find them crossing a road or something, just like it's no big deal. Really quite big, some of them as well. Also snakes are really common. They like to go in your pool and things like that. Most of them are kind of harmless, but just be aware there are some in central Florida that you definitely don't want to mess about with, so maybe just treat them with respect. Also, you'll likely see really some quite large birds. Sandhill cranes are really common, and they can be quite big. They can be quite big. Really cool to look at. We get them all the time around about the villa, and yeah, pretty good. Oh, wild hogs, you'll see them sometimes. Stay away from them. They're not. Yeah, I mean, they're likely to run away, but yeah, wild hogs, they're good. And also black bears. I've never seen a black. Oh, and raccoons. Yeah, there's kind of a lot of wildlife in Florida. So yeah, I mean, you're going to see wildlife, and alligators you will most likely see. I'd be surprised if you didn't see one if you were there for like 2 or 3 weeks. In fact, actually at Disney World, when you're walking through the car parks, because they have like these little waterways that run alongside like certain parking lots, you'll see signs that say beware of alligators and snakes, and they're not like, that's not hyperbole. There could very well be, alligators and snakes in there. So do just keep your wits about you. And these things a lot of the time, if you don't bother them, they're not going to bother you. But they're definitely out there, and I'd be very surprised if you didn't see any. All right, and last but by no means least, that is tipping. Should you do it? How much should you tip? You should do it, really. In Orlando, in Florida, the service industry is heavily based around gratuity, tipping. So whenever you see somebody in a restaurant, or somebody who's giving you a tour, or helping with your bag, say at a hotel, they will have certainly quite a large proportion of their salary is kind of assumed that they will be getting as tips. In fact, in some instances, they'll be working for tips only. So if we don't tip, that person oftentimes doesn't get paid. Unfortunately for them, the IRS, which is like our Inland Revenue Service here in the UK, will just assume that they are tipped a certain amount, so they'll be taxed on earnings that they didn't even have, for example. So there's a lot of, I know it's very, for us as British people, tipping is kind of like not really it's not really in our culture. I tend to leave something if I go to a restaurant or whatever, but I think that's because I spent a lot of time in the States. I know it's certainly not a common thing. And don't get me wrong, I think if you get like atrocious service or somebody's like just rude or whatever, yeah, don't leave them a tip. I mean, if they're being a jerk, don't tip them. But it is kind of just, I don't want to say expected, but it is, because like I say, the IRS actually assume, they expect them to earn a certain amount in tips. So if they don't, not only did they get taxed on their income that they did have, but they also get taxed on income that they didn't have as well, which I think you can agree is kind of a terrible situation. Now, nobody's forcing them to do the jobs. I know all the arguments and etc., but in my opinion, I would tip in all but the most extreme cases. Like if somebody, I've had it where somebody's just been really offhand and rude with me, and I just haven't left a tip. But generally speaking, I tip basically everybody. You know, it's like people helping you with your bags at an airport or helping with your bags at a hotel or something like that. You usually tip them a couple of dollars per bag. Depends on how swanky the hotel is and how big and heavy your bags are. There's a whole etiquette for it. In fact, I've got a video on this channel, a guide to tipping. You can check it out. I'll link it in the description down below if you really want to know kind of all the ins and outs of tipping, because it can be very tricky going from, say, where I live, which is the UK, traveling to the United States and having, if you've never done it before, not knowing what is appropriate. Like, you know, do I tip this guy like $1, or is he, you know, is she wanting like $20? You know, is that too much? Am I really insulting them by only giving them $2 or $5, or is that like a lot? I've got a whole guide to it, so you can check that out. But yeah, who do you tip? If they're giving you a service of any description, they're probably expecting some kind of tip. How much should you tip? Well, it's kind of up to you, but like, for example, in a restaurant, typical these days is between 18 and 25% of the pre-tax bill. Pre-tax, because obviously in the States they have the tax on afterwards. You don't tip on tax, you just tip on what you've got. So if your food prior to tax was $100, then 18% would obviously be $18, and then anything else would be added on top. So that's how much you tip. Who do you tip? A lot of people. Check out the tipping guide. So thanks so much for watching this video. If you did enjoy it, make sure to leave it a like, perhaps consider subscribing to the channel, and perhaps you might want to check out this video next.